Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelzer back with the most recent live stream of the Social Change Career Podcast, episode 8, season 15. We'll be talking about a really cool topic of why innovation fails without humans at the center with Valentina Cullmann. For people who may not have joined a live stream before, a quick overview. We tend to go about 1 hour, and we deeply enjoy hearing from people on YouTube or LinkedIn who are watching. So at any time in the comments, please feel free to share a bit about your work, where you're watching from, your questions and resources, and we'll try to weave those into the conversation where possible. This is one of over 200 episodes. I think we're just about at 200. Featuring brilliant innovators from impact investing to tech for social change to reducing gender-based violence to heads of foundations to community activists. So please check out the 200 plus episodes at pcdn.global/listen or any major podcasting platform. This podcast will be converted to an audio episode by Friday, so you can find it live there or again on all the different podcast platforms. And then 3 quick requests before we get started. Please follow Valentina on LinkedIn. Please follow PCDN on LinkedIn and check out all of our free resources, our newsletters, and our paid services. And then if you like the podcast, or this is a request as a podcaster, which I love to do, whether it's this podcast or any podcast you listen to more than once, please take 20 seconds to share and rate it on whatever platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, because it helps grow the reach. So Valentina is an innovation practitioner in international economic development focused on how innovation and technology can be leveraged and scaled for sustainability in the global south. Over the past decade, she has designed, implemented, and advised innovation programs across Asia, Latin America, and Africa, ranging from hackathons and policy labs to large-scale innovation facilities that bring together entrepreneurs and impact ventures from around the world. She holds a two master's degree in international business and politics from Copenhagen Business School and the London School of Economics. She began her career in tech startups and global corporations before moving into international cooperation, working on digital innovation, economic promotion, and climate impact with GIZ, BMZ, the European Commission, and other donors. Alongside her advisory work, she has facilitated 60 plus workshops and trainings on leadership, collaboration, and innovation for global teams. Just one other quick note, we're both based in Medellin, and so for anybody who is based in Medellin or happens to be passing through, there are hundreds, if not thousands of people doing amazing innovation work, but we also have 2 great impact communities. So if you happen to be passing through, message either one of us. We do meetups and speaker events and dinners. And so Valentina and I met through the impact community. So Valentina, thank you so much for taking time to share your wisdom, questions, and experience. And just to start off with, because there was a lot of buzzwords in your bio. So when did you first become aware that innovation is a field of practice or cross-cutting? And when you think back to your younger years, what did you envision yourself potentially doing as a career?
Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you also for diving right into it. Because I completely agree. Innovation is like the word that everybody likes to throw out these days, or not only these days. I did certainly not envision myself in my younger years as an innovation practitioner. I mean, I think as a child, I wanted to be either a private detective or an international spy. And when you work in international development, sometimes people do think you're an international spy just based on the countries you visit. No, but I became very interested in the innovation topic throughout my studies and the different internships that I did, I would say. By the time I graduated, I think you mentioned I did 2 masters in the field of international business and international politics. And I had done probably like 5 internships and worked also all through my studies. So I had seen a lot of different organizations from the inside. And I became more and more interested in the question of how to promote economic development, and especially how to promote the innovative capacity of companies. So I also myself worked in startups before. I worked, I think, once with an international big consultancy with PricewaterhouseCoopers on promotion of economic approaches, and all these became me quite interested in the field. Now, in my studies, and also when I with my first jobs, I had no idea something like international cooperation existed. This sector was not something I was even aware of. So I drifted into that a little bit more by chance, because I saw a job that was very interesting, working in Myanmar, also working on topics of entrepreneurship. And I think so, since that head start in development, that was like probably like 12 years ago, I became increasingly interested not only in innovation in the economy, but specifically also digital innovation and the potential impact of digital technologies. And that's a topic that has been staying with me until now.
Okay, thank you. And can you say a little bit more about where you grew up and what you did in undergrad and why you chose to do 2 masters and connected to the double masters? And for anyone who's thinking about upskilling, let's say through formal education, any advice about how you selected the programs for you and how others might think about the time and money investment if they're thinking about formal education?
So I grew up in Germany in I don't want to say unexciting town, because then my people from back home are going to be upset, but a town you probably don't know. It's called Bochum. And I think I was one of those kids who was interested in too many things. So for me, it wasn't crystal clear. Like I did art, I did math, I did English, I loved biology. I had a lot of different things, like topics at school that I liked. I studied in my undergrad in the Netherlands, international business, with an exchange in France, from learning the language mainly. Mainly because I think at the time I was quite interested in an international career. Maybe when you grow up in a town that you don't find particularly exciting, you really want to get out and see something of the world. And my undergrad, and maybe that is often the case, my undergrad felt much more like a hardcore learning boot camp. So we had exams every 8 weeks. We had I think I read 1,000 or more pages within 8 weeks, like every term. And it was quite intense. I was doing international case competitions, which was great. It's kind of training you for a consulting career, I would say. You got to travel to New Zealand for that, and then to Thailand and meet other international teams. But it was very fast paced, and a lot of learning by heart, learning a complete new vocabulary, learning. I did a major in finance, so a lot about financial modeling. And for me personally, I think my masters were really a great idea, because it took a little bit of that high pressure out and allowed me more to really think about some real world complexities of socio-political realities, and also firm my values. And I think that is something important when you work in international development. So in my master's, I could really deeply explore topics such as what do we think of access and benefit sharing around indigenous knowledge, for example? Or I had studies on different conflict areas, on national self-determination, which was a very interesting, interesting topic, and applies to a lot of really protracted conflicts worldwide. I also really had a lot about different economic promotion approaches, local regional development, cluster approaches, innovation promotion, all these things. And so I did my master for 2.5 years, because I did a double degree. For me personally, I must say, I'm one of these persons who really enjoyed my master's. That might not be the same for you. So I also don't want to make a blanket statement that that's what you're supposed to be doing. If you're more like a hands-on person, and especially if you want to go into management position, organizational coordinator roles, leadership roles, I'm not sure if you need the master. But for me personally, it's something I would say I still draw on in terms of having a more firm base of where I stand with certain ethical questions, with value questions, and also some fundament of technical knowledge.
Thank you so much, and welcome. We have a bunch of people watching from around the world. So welcome Lindsay, who's working in AI safety in South Africa. And please keep letting us know where you're watching from. Feel free to share about yourselves and your questions. So just a follow-up question. So when people come to you and say, what the kind of work you do in digital innovation, economic development, and partnerships, and they say, do you recommend a master's or not? Obviously, as you said, it's everyone's individual choice. So obviously people need to weigh their own financial circumstances, time, benefits, look at the job market. But what are some questions that you found useful in selecting? Because 2 masters, I know people who do it. I have friends who did 2 PhDs. That's crazy. But what are the things that help guide you in selecting the double masters, and things that you think could be helpful for others, both in exploring whether a master's degree might be the right choice for them, or a good choice, and and kind of how to select programs that are going to give, because there's a lot of theoretical knowledge. And one of my old bosses at Georgetown's one of the world's top social psychologists, and used to say there's nothing as practical as a good theory. But there's also a danger. I've had lots of employers tell me in the research I've done, like, people come out filled with too much theory and not enough practice. So just like your thoughts on grad school in general, and what are some guiding questions you would suggest people consider as they might explore it?
So maybe first of all, and please stop me if I deviate too much from this question, but like, I do like to think of building a career a little bit like maybe in a way you do like a design thinking approach in a lab sometimes, right? I think the best thing you can do is finding like low cost, low risk ways to try out different things. So I can't stress enough the importance also on not only studying, but also looking for that like practical experience. Even if it just means like coming out of like after 3 months or 6 months of an internship, or like a side job that you had, and saying like, I would never want to go back there, right? But for me personally, I think that helped a lot, because it gave me like a more of an understanding of the type of jobs I want to do, the topics I was interested in. And the thing is, if you're only in university, I think it seems often quite abstract what you're really doing with these things in the real world, right? When I studied finance and then I came into like a financial and accounting department, I was like, okay, this is very different from my textbooks, right? But it even becomes more abstract when you go into, I'd say, international development or promotion. So that's the one thing. In terms of choosing a master, I do speak probably from a position of privilege, because I'm German, and a lot of like just the cost of studying is so much lower in Europe. I would also say I maxed out the Schengen Agreement in my university years. And that was something that was extremely important to me. Like, with the double degree, I was lucky to be able to study at a London School of Economics for a little bit without having to pay that hefty fee. I had applied for like a full master there and decided I can't afford it. So that was actually a really lucky coincidence. But I think in addition to looking for master programs that allowed me this time abroad, I really also looked at what their study methodology is. How many people are in the classroom? In my undergrad, we had like 14 people in our tutorials, and that's where the learning was happening. In my master, same. It wasn't like 2,000 people in a lecture and you're left by yourself. They were like practitioners coming in all the time. There were people coming from all kinds of businesses. You had like researchers that had not only worked in academic fields, but also in more applied fields. And I think that was all really important to me, because I was always quite interested in academia as well, but like I didn't see myself as like, straight on going towards a PhD. I really wanted to see how these things work in the real world. And then, of course, in business, I think it's fairly easy to find a lot of like rankings of like business schools and so on. Like it's a very competitive university field, I would say. In other studies, you might have to do a bit more of your own research and talk to people of what the experience really is like.
So I'll just make a couple of points that, so I lived in Europe many years, and again, changed my life. But I did my master's in Central European University, and obviously there's lots of great universities, and I got a tuition fellowship, and it is one of the best universities in Europe. So I had to pay my living, but I had some money left over from a fellowship. Yeah. So, if you're going to do grad school, I mean, obviously US is insanely expensive, most programs. And some of the UK is quite expensive, but there are also a decent amount of fellowships. Fulbright, Rotary, Stanford has a new fellowship. The Knight Hennessy fellow, like there's a lot of the Dodd Fellowship. So one of the things, if you are thinking about programs, always try to look at least a year in advance and start exploring fellowships again, because if it is a time investment. So just out of curiosity, how many languages do you communicate in?
I mean, I come to think that I have the brain capacity for 3.5 languages.
Okay.
And so whenever I learn one language better, then I tend to
Mm.
forget one. So I lived in Denmark for 3.5 years, for example, and I went up to Danish level 6. I was quite proud of that. Like,
And
I don't think I would be able to communicate in that anymore. I
what
do work in
what is your half a language currently?
um,
Yeah, because I have the same experience.
currently.
Like, yeah.
I think it's probably French. I
Okay.
was quite fluent in French, and Spanish has eaten it up quite a bit. But I still do a bit
Mhm.
of work in French. I
Okay.
would say, like confidently, I work in English, Spanish, and German. And then with French, I always needed like a little bit of time to get back into it, especially when
Okay.
I live part time like I do in Colombia. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I studied Hungarian, French, can't speak, learned Hungarian very well, not written, but now for this
Hungarian.
30 years, I lived 3 years in Hungary, learned a
That
decent
is
amount of
impressive.
Czech,
Yeah,
Bosnian, but it's like right now it's only English and Spanish and a tiny bit of Bosnian, but Hungarian is just, I can read it, I can't speak it. Like it's
yeah,
interesting. Um,
yeah.
so can you talk a little bit? You said you worked, so thinking postmasters or post undergraduate, you worked for, did you go into consulting first or you worked in startups first?
So I first worked in a startup in Copenhagen, in like a kind of like digital software startup. I already started like doing my masters actually to work for them, and then like worked full time afterwards. And in parallel, I had like applied to GIZ for my first work in international development, and magically got this job that would take me to Myanmar. Um, but I also, yeah, I really enjoyed that work because I think later on working more with startup funds and facilities and so on, it's good to have been inside one before and seeing the dynamics and like the organization, how it works, the
Mhm.
challenges they face and so on.
And you don't have to go into too much detail, but like, what was your role in the startup? And was it rapidly growing, slowly growing, rapidly failing? And what would you say in terms of like the learning experience, whether someone is working for an early stage nonprofit
Mm,
or a startup? Like, what are some, because not everybody, it's not made for everyone. So what
yeah,
are some, like, people are thinking about, oh, I want to work for or potentially found a startup or a nonprofit. Obviously they're different,
yeah,
but there's something really exciting but also terrifying about being part of something that is emerging. So like,
yes.
any reflections on that?
And this wasn't the only startup I worked for, but yeah, I think this one I was hired probably number 30 when I was hired. Like it was still fairly small, and then it exploded. I think we were like, I don't want to. Yeah, I mean it's been a long time, so I'm not sure about the numbers, but I think it probably was like 120 people or something at some point. So they got a lot of investment. They worked in social media analytics and so on. So it was like in the 2010s, it was like a sector that like boomed. It was I really enjoyed it because it was a very international dynamic team. I think what is interesting and what you have to be aware of in a startup is always that often when you start, there might not be any human resource department. There might not be a lot of organizational structures. So on the one hand, that can create a lot of opportunities for you to advance rapidly. You can really like when you're interested in something, you can like kind of make that your thing and build your own career in a way. On the other hand, that can be a bit destabilizing. And of course, there are so, and I'm not speaking about the startup now, but I think in general, like there can be dynamics of a lot of like political conflicts also as like people are trying to when career paths aren't so defined, right? So it can feel quite turbulent. And I was working in the as I think customer success advisor was the term. So I was working in between the research department, all the developers, and the client side. That all kind of like different in big brands, international ones. And so that was a very interesting role because it was a lot of like translating role in a way, like going to the developers and be like, can you do this? And they're like, no, the platform works like that. And you have to go back and try to find a compromise. And so, yeah, that was an interesting role. I think generally, if you go into especially much smaller startups, there are also a lot of opportunities for early on leadership, for a lot of like very strategic roles. So yeah, I definitely think that is also something that is a great career move in your early years when you have a lot of energy and want to try out a lot of different things.
Yes, and I would say I've hired quite a number of developers. I won't get to all the details, but where I've done been part of organizations where we've done scoping, scope of works, then we get multiple bids, and usually for kind of software or websites, and then and sometimes I'll even talk to brilliant tech people and be like, help me select the best proposal. And I'll say, I've had so many conflicts. And again, I'm not saying I'm not part of it, where it's like we scope something out, the budget and the workflow and the deliverables, and they under deliver and over promise. And again, everybody has responsibility, but that ability to translate between the human and the tech, I'm not separating, is such a huge, that ability to go between worlds and say that this is what I hear is invaluable. And that's one skill I don't see going away in the AI world.
Yeah.
And multiple times when I've hired companies, they've promised the world, and then after a few years, the system collapses, and they're like, "I thought you said this is like open source and it's going to go forever." And anyway, I'm sure they're frustrated too. But I've seen that so much. But
Yes.
getting into, so did you work for PwC? You said some, like,
yeah, I did like a 6 months internship for them. With like the consulting part of it, and actually like a very small team that was working on public economic policies. So kind of like sector policies, cluster stuff, technology transfer. So that was like right on more like the innovation part. And I think also just it's interesting because it was a very corporate experience, and so like a very different world as well. Like I am quite fascinated by cross-cultural communication, I would call it. And I don't just mean between nations. I think it's very interesting, these different worlds between startups and corporates, for example, worlds apart. So a very, very different personality I had to develop.
And were you exploring the potential of kind of, because I have lots of alum who went full-time into consulting and lots of friends or even clients. So were you exploring like building a career in one of the main consultancies, and what led to this opportunity in GIZ in Myanmar? Like, were you thinking, oh, like maybe you want to use your skills and networks to do something outside of the consulting world? Or so how did you make that transition? Like if you were in like, because a lot of people would dream about working for McKinsey or PwC or Deloitte. And so how did that transition happen?
I mean, I think with my studies, my studies prepared a lot towards that consulting, and like I have a lot of friends who went into the big five or big major consulting companies. At the time, I think I didn't see so many opportunities in the sustainability field, and that was something I was interested in. I found like business and economics quite interesting, but I was always fascinated by how can you use these instruments for the public good. And so I didn't see myself kind of going into like a classic role where you become maybe like an expert for logistics and supply chain management or something, right? Like, and there's a different approach to that, or we were working with real estate sectors or something. I wanted to like more look at what is the social good behind that. So I think that was something that I was like trying to find, and at the time, I think now there's a lot of opportunities in that field actually, also for like the big consulting companies. At the times, I didn't see it so much. I also worked for like a big energy company, kind of also an internship for like 2 or 3 months. I think 3 months internship over the summer. That was like really big on renewable energy, and there it was the same because I was interested in renewable energy. But then I think that experience helped me to realize what I'm interested in is the impact. And I wanted to know about the impact and how to measure it and how to promote it and the strategy behind that. So when you build like certain type of solar parks, that was what I was interested in. But my role was then like working on the financial side and the financial vehicles behind it. And I realized maybe that is not where my passion goes. So yeah, from there, like I then drifted more towards the development sector as something really focused on that impact.
Okay. And welcome, Prince from Sierra Leone. Again, please keep letting us know your questions and comments. So if you had to summarize, like if you had to describe, not just in a word, but a couple of sentences, since you went to work with GIZ in Myanmar, like how would you describe your role or roles or functions, and how much is Valentina as an independent consultant versus have you been embedded full-time in organizations, or, how would you describe, like, there's lots of different things you do and have done, but how would you describe your roles and functions? And
yeah. So first of all, I have to make a differentiation on innovation careers. So I have worked it from both sides. I think I've, on the one hand, worked as an innovation expert, so to say, on projects and programs that are promoting innovation in the economy. So that can be something like startup facilities, funding instruments for that. It can be policy labs. It can be living labs of the university. So all kind of different kind of promotion programs. A lot of that focusing also on digital technologies and their role in the economy, how to promote the safe use of AI, building alliances around it, so on. And then on the other hand, you can look at innovation as a process. And that's also something I'm really passionate about. And I'm really trying to work these both careers. So I work also as a facilitator and as a trainer, where I work with a lot of times teams on their innovative capabilities, on better collaboration, of how to tap into the power of diversity of team members, and playing around with a lot of like methods that come from the innovation fields, like design thinking, human-centered design, future-oriented methods, system-oriented methods. And so I think those are roughly the two career paths that you can take in that field, or at least that I believe.
And can you describe, obviously not giving away anything client or nothing too sensitive, but what are 2 or 3 examples of projects or initiatives on either one or both of those ends that you would describe either been the most fun, the most impactful, just like mind-blowingly cool?
I mean, I worked, for example, with like a team mostly out of Africa. I think that one other team member here in Germany on the design of like a climate positive innovation facility. That was really fun. It was because it was like climate positive. We spent a lot of time talking to climate entrepreneurs from all over Africa, and really trying to understand like what are the needs in terms of financing that they need, and in terms of technical support they need, and how can we kind of integrate this facility into like a larger pipeline of innovation promotion.
Just interrupt for 1 second, just in terms of the terminology, can you explain for what you mean by facility? So is that like a funding mechanism? Is it a physical space? Like,
I mean, facility is like a nice term when you want to be a bit more broad than fund. But yeah, like I mean, the funding part is one part, and then the facility like kind of also can incorporate other types of support that you need, like be it technical advice, mentoring, be it matchmaking with other investors. So we called it kind of like a facility in that sense. I think another project I was really that has been like a really big project of mine was the Smart Development Fund. It's a GIZ, BMZ and European Union financed big fund, or was at the time, that started as like an innovation competition in the pandemic, where I started as a consultant and then later on became like actually employed again. And so in the pandemic, the idea was to look at what kind of approaches do we have for corona response, digital approaches that can be rapidly scaled around the world in the global south in a variety of fields like education, in health, obviously, in economic development and so on. And that competition went through the roof. We had over 1,000 submissions. So it felt a lot working like in a startup in a way, because we were scrambling together people and support and resources, had a huge network of partners. So that was really great, very fast paced. And then selecting 8 initiatives out of that. And each initiative was like a mini project because it was funded by like €1 million or something. It was like a big in that sense. And those got scaled.
Can you provide some examples of the, so there was 1,000 plus projects, let's say 8 were funded or supported, what did it mean in practice, and both like what were the projects focused on, and how did being part of this innovation competition, I mean, you can't always be completely corollary, but like what changed as a result?
So each of these projects had like very different impact ambitions. So it could be something like using, for example, using drones for last mile delivery of medication. And so the project would be focusing actually on the piloting on the technology and the the training of drone pilots in Africa to be able to fly these. So and that would be like set up as a corporation then with like also like a drone technology provider and a local institute that served then as the academy, so to say. It could also be something like working with the health system in another country where you really try to promote more digitalization of the health system that helps you in the corona response, maybe like a more efficient allocation of beds, but then like overall like reduces patient waiting time, making sure like electronic patient records are like passed on, reduces a lot of frictions there, makes the entire like system more agile, makes it like helps people to work better together. So very different impact ambition. And then there was one, for example, where we worked with rural women centers. So it was kind of in working closely with an NGO that had been working in rural parts of India for a long time. And they had set up like communities of women entrepreneurs that would provide crucial services to their communities. So it would be like a woman sitting somewhere in a rural village. And as part of the project, we worked with digital technologies to be able to provide telemedicine services to these communities. And the beautiful part of that was like, not only did this help to increase the health outcomes for the communities because they had access to telemedicine in the pandemic and afterwards, but also the social position of the woman was often quite strengthened because they were the center of it and running it and making some money with it, and also quite respected in their communities in their role. So again, a very different one. So these 8 initiatives were widely different. I think we also had a youth marketplace for careers, that right. But it was really interesting because like they had 2 things in common. One was it was a partnership approach. So it was always very different organizations working together, maybe like a technology company and a local NGO, or like so different setups. And the other part, it was always about scaling innovation. So we said we don't do any more piloting. That has been done. We look for how to bring this to other contexts to scale it horizontally, vertically at bigger impact. And that's also why they needed more funding than you would have when you do like just like the first proof of principle piloting.
So a question maybe more related to your career. So when you're working on projects, because it sounds like for the past 10 to 12 years, you mostly have been independent, like advising, supporting, consulting, maybe not, so are projects come for people, because so many people want to work as a consultant.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was just on a call this morning, like USAID is destroyed. And a lot of, there's a difference between innovative finance and international development, but USA did have an innovation lab, and there was a lot of people working as consultants. So just how much work just comes to you versus how much you're going out to seek it, and then like the good and the bad. Because I've worked as a consultant. I've been embedded in, I've worked big universities and medium-sized NGOs, started my own things, and worked as an independent consultant. And there's really good parts to consulting. But if you're independent, it's also feast or famine. Sometimes there's too much work and you're working insane. Sometimes there's no work. There's no benefits. There's no job security. And then a lot of times the consulting work that I've done and still do, sometimes it's super fascinating, but then like my little or big role is done. And like, maybe I stay in touch with people, but you don't really know in the end how things turn out sometimes. So so how does the work come to you? And then for anyone who is already working as a consultant or thinking about it, like the good and the bad.
Yeah. This is a question I think that everybody always asks, right? Like, how do you manage client acquisition? So I would say it would have been really hard for me to start my career as a freelance consultant. I draw a lot on the jobs that I had where I was part of a team, working in person alongside people, being fully employed. And so there is really, I think, like a stream of projects that come to me, really, where people remember that I like my work, that they trust me, that I worked on these different topics, that I work in economic development and innovation, or maybe that I'm a facilitator too. And so they reach out and they say, hey, we actually are looking for someone to help us here. And that's like a huge part, I would say, of my work. But then there is also like the entire like reaching out proactively. I do also apply for tenders. I mean, there are a lot of like in development, it's also mandated like an X amount of money needs to be tendered out. So I work either by myself when I see tenders or with a consulting company where I'm then part of the expert team. And I think there you just need to learn with frustration and rejection, because if you have a really strong proposal, your chances are usually like 10%, right? So, and it's often like a lot of work that goes into that. And I still do those because they are often quite interesting topics or different new clients. So it's a good opportunity to build new networks. But I would definitely recommend to try to go by both, if that's possible. And then sometimes also things come by chance, right? Like you might meet someone at a conference, or someone you worked with in a completely different context talks to you about their work, and you develop a kind of like peer coaching almost. And at some point they're like, hey, can you maybe come and work on this too? So I think those are, I don't have a magic recipe for this, but I think those are the approaches that work a lot for me. I have not done a more traditional marketing where I mean, I have a website and I sometimes post on LinkedIn, and you know, I get interest of people and so on, but like I haven't done like a cold calling of potential clients basically, which I think could also work. In terms of like the reality of consulting, I think the point you mentioned about a very limited time that you work on something, I think that is a really good point you're making there, because it's something you have to be comfortable with. As a freelance consultant, you have a lot of very different projects, and you have them for a short time, and then you're kind of out and you jump on something else. For me, projects are usually between 3 and 6 months long, which for me is a nice time frame. It's not a week. So it is like a substantial time. And I stay usually in touch, and sometimes I come back to the same project team with multiple projects like over the years, which is always really nice when you already know the people. But I think it's a very big change from working in a company where in the first 6 months you get to know everybody, and then you have your team, they have your back, you know people, you have your role. As a consultant, you're constantly thrown into that again and again, and that's something you have to learn to be comfortable with. Or if it's not your style of working, then you probably want to think about this career.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. And we could do a whole, many conversations about the ethics of consulting, the practice of consulting. I remember one of my first full-time jobs, I would hire consultants, and this is going back 30 years. It was like a multi-million-dollar project, and I remember we would pay them, I don't know, $200 or $300 a day. And I was like, that is so much, and their expenses. And in my mind, I'm like, that is so much frigging money. And then when I started working as a consultant, it is, but it isn't, because again, no benefits, no taxes, no, so you got to pay high tax. So, and there's also, I call it the bizarre dance of the industry. So I'll say like, I don't think I would do this now, but I've worked on proposals where I have no expertise. We're not the right people. We're not the right team. We're reaching out to countries or sectors where we have zero expertise. It's this weird partnership dance where like there's a funding opportunity, and either we want to be part of it, or someone else wants to be part of it and include us. But there's so much, and then if you think about the overhead and multiple levels and lack of institutional knowledge, like there's so much bizarreness. So can you talk? And there's also power relations, because I will say, in this, like in terms of who gets hired, I think it is changing where it's no longer the expat European or US consultant who is seen as, because I've worked on things, then a lot of times now I'll say no, because like there's someone better locally or regionally, or I'll recommend other. But can you talk about both about the challenge of like this bizarreness? I'm not saying in all consultancies, because it's not. There's a lot of beautiful, but the weird aspects of this dance of partnership to access potential funding, and then also just power and kind of identity politics.
Yeah, I think for me it's often more important who's on my team than what the topic is, because the first thing you do want to have is people you can rely on. I also I worked in consulting actually for a bit as well in development. And so I was also in the role of the project coordinator who's hiring experts and putting them on tender proposals. And then sometimes bizarre things happen. You win a tender and the team leader just disappears and you can't find him for like 3-4 weeks. And by then, like the donor has gone crazy and you had to find someone new. Like, there's a lot of stories where I was really like, what is this business with like consultants and the ethic behind it and so on. I do think there's like a big case to be made, though. The way that financing is often structured in development is very slow and very non-agile. And there are often work peaks where suddenly you just don't have the staff and you urgently need someone. And I think this is a lot where my work comes in as well, because then it's not like a project I will have in a year. It's a project I have now. And so, yeah, I look a lot of like around like if I go with a consulting company, who's the company? Are they legitimate? What is their work ethic? Who else is on the team? I do also turn down a lot of things where I'm like, this is wishful thinking. I don't think I can do what's in the TOR, and I don't want to oversell myself. I think there is like a certain amount, you have to maybe establish yourself like what that amount is, but there is a certain amount of like new challenge that is allowed to be in a project. You can't only do things that you are 100% knowledgeable about and that you have done 3 times already. It's also not what you would do as someone who's employed. You can also like jump into new topics. But yeah, I think there are a lot of I think what you're referring to also, it's a very strange setup sometimes when you look at the entire sector and you see how the money is being passed through from donor, like sometimes the European Union, from European Union to member state, then from member state to their development agency, then from their development agency to a consulting because they have to tender something out, and then from the consultant to the consultant, and then that person is like sent on the ground to whatever country. And then you're like, okay, well, the overhead has eaten away most of the funds already. That is, I would say, not always the case, but these structures also exist.
Right. Yeah, I've worked on, I won't go into too much detail about a consultancy for a year, just about 20 or 30 days with another colleague for a international development agency, like training, capacity, research building. And I think it was an interesting consultancy. I think we did relatively good work, but we were thinking like, how much are we getting paid versus the contractor? And then there's a lot of dysfunction. And then there was some moment like where we're all in crisis. We worked through that. And then when the contract went up for rebid, both myself and my partner, we didn't want to be part of it. Like it was like just part of it was so it's also like this weird thing of like institutional knowledge, because like we left and someone else got the contract. So there's so much of that. Anyway, but there's a lot of bizarreness. There's a book that came out many years ago. It's not so much an international development. It's called One Nation Under Contract, I think is the title, for a professor at University of Bennington College. And it was talking about the outsourcing of U.S. foreign policy. Just interesting. But a question is like, what does it mean to be like do you like have an innovation hat? Or like, I'm just curious, when you go to parties or just like, what does it mean to be like an innovation person? And like, what is the really cool thing? Like, do you have I do some of that, but do you think you have a different perspective? It's a framework, it's a process. And then like, do you wind up in a lot of conversations with people like, I have a PhD in conflict resolution. People sometimes ask me about conflicts or does it mean like all these times you're getting these questions from just people you meet on the street or in cafes, like, tell me how to innovate?
I wish there would be an innovation hat, because maybe it would be then easier to kind of explain to people what that entails and what your value is. I would say, like, when I talk about innovation, I usually pick it apart by like practices or competences behind it. And I think one big part is, for me, innovation always rests on diversity. I mean, the key is like, you don't want to have a room full of people saying the same thing. Like, you will never be innovative, right? And so the first thing is about, how do you create that diversity? Who is included at the table and who isn't included? And that can be in the small, so you can really talk about your team. On a team level, I think often you have like international teams, but then you might still have, like, I had a client, for example, that had a wonderful team. They were very harmonious. Everybody loved working there. They were very supportive and so on. but they weren't innovative enough, and that was a leadership concern. And the key was they didn't have any conflict. So you really want to think of like how to foster kind of this productive conflict. I think there was I think it's Adam Grant probably who coined that term, the challenge network. So when you're on a team level, you don't only want to have the support network, you want to have a challenge network. You want to have people that will really challenge you.
So that's, just it's to interrupt, and Adam Grant's work is very interesting, but can you give an example? I mean, nothing too specific, like when teams are very harmonious, and it could be genuine or it could be out of fear, or it could just be people are like, what's an example of either yourself as an innovation specialist or instigating on the team? Like what is an example of productive conflict, or how do you kind of try to move that into a system?
I think first it's about like really educating people, making them aware that this is an issue, right? And the key there is a lot to work to create awareness for the difference between personal conflict and productive conflict. And so you can do a lot of like, I mean, in the facilitator space, you can do a lot of fun work with simulations, for example, right? You can put people actually in positions where you have to debate and simulate very opposing fractions. And then the goal is of the game to be like, let's try to turn this into a productive conflict and not a personal conflict. But really to get people out of their comfort zone, I think is the key as a facilitator. And there's a lot of fun methods you can use for that. So that's the one thing. And I think on a more programmatic level, you want to really think of like, how do you foster that diversity in terms of alliances between different stakeholders? You want to think of like, who are the organizations involved in here and what is their say? Who are the target groups involved and how are they involved? You know, are you venturing out there, like, you know, with your glasses on, like studying them in a way, or are you inviting them in, explaining to them, this is maybe, you know, the sometimes a bit bureaucratic process behind this new project, but we really want to work with you. We want to work together. Let's try to make a co-creation process of this, of what the new project will look like. And we want to understand your actual needs because you're the one implementing it, or you're the one who's supposed to be impacted by it. And I think that is a big part of my work as well.
Okay, so a question here. I mean, I've been trained in facilitation. I facilitate a lot, and I think there's lots of tools you can use, but there's also like a mental approach. And I think it's almost like learning how to drive a car. Like when I learned how to drive, I remember like at one point I was with a friend back when people smoked, and he was driving a stick shift, the standard, driving a car, smoking a cigarette, drinking coffee, talking to me and driving. And my brain was like, how could you do all these things at once? And then like once you learn how to drive, it kind of becomes more seamless. And I think when I first started facilitating, I wanted to control more. And I think like when you become more, there's different kinds of facilitation, like whether it's a meeting, conflict, organizational, but I think the more I've facilitated, there's a part of me is like, it can kind of be comfortable in the unknown and the chaos, but still have a structure. So, but any advice, because facilitation is such a critical skill. Yeah. So how did you develop it? Or for someone's like, hey, I want to become a better facilitator, or in my organization, like any pathways you might suggest how someone could improve their facilitation toolkit and also process?
I think facilitation is one of these fields where you never stop learning, both from each workshop you facilitate and each group you facilitate, as well as like the amount of methods that are out there. I think for me, it did help a lot to have some formal training. Like I did, like, for example, like a more elaborate training on system-based organizational development, where you learn to work with scaling questions, for example, with like different question technique, paradox questions. Like, right, like if you have a very protracted conflict and you can't see a way out, you ask people to make it worse. And then, they love to, like, it's a fun exercise, you do that. And then as soon as you do that, you can be like, okay, now that you made it worse, that you can also make it better, because just by refraining from that, you will not, you already have some leverage here. So there's like, different techniques you can use there. There's an entire like field of design thinking and human-centered design where I was trained in. And I think that is a really important one here, because it's a lot about different brainstorming techniques of like kind of opening up the room to all the ideas and then structuring it, closing it down, and finding I think they call it the double diamond, right? Like finding this process flow. But I think this is something that you continually have to keep building. And then there's so much of just getting out there, getting out of your own comfort zone and trying it out. And just knowing that you're never the expert in this, but you're also like learning as a facilitator with each group. At some level also, you kind of have to dance with it, right? Like you never know what's going to happen in the room. You have to go in there and to one degree also give it up, right? Like
yeah. And that there's a couple, Arnie and Amy Mendel, who do it's called process psychology. I haven't been through the training. I have some friends out, but I've been through a training someone else did based on their philosophy, and it's also just really interesting. Some of it's far out there, but they do a lot of large group work, and part of it is like these roles are going to show up in all kinds of facilities. If it's 2 hours, no, but if it's like, there's going to be the joker and this and that, and it's almost like the conflict resolution principles separate the person from the problem. Like, oh, there's someone who's like, it's like almost like recognize that energy's in the room and it's going to show up somehow. So a question, let me just find the person's name, sorry, from Derek, based in Kenya. So I couldn't paste it in, but I'm an artist, designer, storyteller, and entrepreneur in Kenya, currently building solutions for artists and creatives through my startup, Sana Fusion. The biggest challenge that they're facing is kind of the vision and generating income. And how can we do that without diverting full attention from the solutions we provide to making money? So just like any thoughts, because this happens whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, like any from your own experience or your consulting work, that tension between everybody needs to pay the bills. And if you have an organization more than just your own, and related to that, but also since you've done a lot of work on access to finance, funding, partnerships, like also when you're when others are going through a pathway to access funding or capacity building, like what makes a difference between those, let's say, proposals or requests that have a higher chance of succeeding versus those that don't?
Yeah.
So two questions. One is like that balance between vision, ethics, and money. And then the other one is more on the receiving end. If you're helping provide services, like what makes a pitch or competition or somebody stand out?
Yeah. I mean, for the first one, it is really hard. It's so easy to be like in the trap of like everyday demands, especially when you run a small company. It never stops, right? Like you work 24/7. The other day, I heard this quote again, like, if you as leadership don't invest 40% of your work time into innovation and foresight, you're not an innovative company. And it is something maybe just to keep in mind. It might sometimes be harsh because it is a lot of time that you will have to invest in this, but it's so crucial to pull yourself out of the everyday. And there are different ways to do that, right? Like it often helps to have a kind of like retreat of like a few days where you can only devote your time actually thinking through the implication of your vision, of where you want to go, of looking more strategically at opportunities arising. And I think it's a lot of like trusting that this work will pay off in the long term. Because I think in the everyday, whenever you're waiting for yourself to have time, like at 8 p.m., you're probably, after like a long work day, you're not going to be thinking strategically or getting other people's attention and energy for this type of visioning work. I'm also a big proponent of actually physically getting out to wherever you're working and trying to find like a neutral facilitator that helps you with that. Like someone who's like kind of makes sure that the rules of the game are established and guide you through the process, so you don't also have to manage kind of the team dynamic and process at the same time, but really can focus on your role as leadership and as an expert. So that would be my advice here. And the second about what makes a strong proposal. I mean, I'm not sure if I have a golden rule for this. I think this might be like too general, but it's probably goes the same as like any type of application. You want to see that someone devoted time to understand what problem you're really trying to solve. And often that is not possible with just like, ChatGPT type of very general answers, but really something original. And I think for me, when I looked at tenders and I looked at funding proposals, that was something I was looking out for. So someone who really had understood what it was trying, what we were trying to achieve, and also what were the core strategic challenges that they anticipate. And if you can mention those, if you say like, one of the things I noticed about your tender here is resources are staffed very tightly. So we really have to think about how to coordinate. Or we anticipate a lot of political conflict coming up, like different people having different entities having different ideas, right? And if you nail those, then I think, like your proposal is really the one that will stand out.
Okay. So just a quick comment, then we have another question that came in, then we'll start to wrap up. So, I mean, I've helped start different things. I've been part of, bigger things and smaller things. And one NGO I helped start with 5 friends who all of us were doing our PhDs. Like we got to about 400,000 in revenue. We're like, we're going to grow, we're going to change. And I'd say we did about 30-40% of what we really wanted, and the other 50-60% was to pay the bills. Like it wasn't bad, but it wasn't our mission. And we did a lot of strategic planning and visioning and wrote millions of dollars worth of proposals, and we failed spectacularly. And at the end, it was like full-time work for half-time pay and no benefits. Like the organization still exists, but like we didn't reach. And so also sometimes things don't work. And so I think it's also like I was so burnt out. And so I think there was something like, yes, innovation and design thinking, facilitation, and peer-to-peer networking, but sometimes it's either the wrong idea, not the right market, and it's also in this world where so many things are being devastated. So I just want to like I've been through the good and the bad. Yeah. But a question came in from Denise. Why does the development, she's based in the Netherlands, why does the development sector see innovation equals finding a digital solution? Do we need tech solutions to claim innovation? So kind of that question, but also, maybe a short reflection on the AI and everything right now, and where you see that going.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really great question. Craig, maybe just on your last point, because I think this is also a very important one. On a program level, for example, that's a discussion you will always have when you have to say like innovation promotion is not employment promotion, for example. Innovation by default is a very high risk, high failing sector. And if you have gone through something like poured your heart into a startup or like a venture and it fails, it also it takes quite a bit to understand also and recognize that this has been a really important experience, but it might not have made the millions. Like I think that's a really important point about the entire innovative approach. And you also have to be comfortable and have to have the resources to be able to fail, right? Like that is also like a reality of it. If you have like 5 children and a lot of debt to pay, then maybe that's not the time. On the part of like equaling innovation with digital technologies, thank you so much, because that is, I think, one other thing where there is a tendency to say we're going to throw in a fancy technology here and for some years it was blockchain, now everything's artificial intelligence, and then that becomes innovative. And that's a huge bias to counter. And I think here, maybe also going back to the title of this podcast, like it's so important to start with the human reality of like what innovation really means. Like what do we really want to achieve? The impact you're looking at is never X people are using AI. The impact is like our socioeconomic reality has improved, or we had some climate impact, environmental impact, and so on. And maybe there's like a very different type of innovation that is needed. It might be like a very different way of doing things, a behavioral change that you're looking at. And I think also for like the digital technologies, for me was quite fascinating because a lot of methods that flowed out of the early years of Silicon Valley and of the entire tech bubble were quite stipulated towards promoting innovation, but can be applied for any issue. They don't have to be applied for digital technology. So definitely, this is a huge thing to look out for.
So just to put a plug, our podcast guest next week is going to be someone who works at Comfama, which is a very large organization in Antioquia, who works on innovation and foresight, futures, in a 5,000 person organization. So stay tuned. So I want to start wrapping up in two or 3 minutes. So a couple of questions. So one is, you talked about the idea of, and I'm always learning. I love to learn. And some days, I'm always learning AI or tools or reading this or podcasts or courses. But how do you put into practice the idea of like, we talk about it'd be nice if teams or organizations could devote X amount of time to,
Yeah.
not just the doing the daily work, but the visioning and building and experimenting. How do you put that into practice for yourself?
I do. Sorry, also, if you hear an avocado seller in the background, like Craig knows this reality.
Yes.
Just Colombian midday time. Um, so, two things, I think. First, like, I do strategically take time out to talk through my own personal goals. And I actually do work with another coach. And that does help me a lot. I think like the coaching approach, systematic coaching approach is super helpful and relevant. And peer coaching cannot be underestimated in this when you're self-employed like me, especially. I don't have a huge team to work with to do this. And there's like, it's usually then, like now around like New Year's is a good time when other things are calming down. You can just say like, okay, this week I'm really working on that. And those are then the bigger picture things. The other thing is, and I think I might have mentioned that in the beginning, I'm a big proponent of like trying to find spaces for myself to experiment and fail. And the entire way of how I got into becoming a self-employed consultant, I think was quite typical for this, because I had never really planned to be a freelance consultant. I had planned to come to Colombia and learn proper Spanish for 6 months because I was very interested in Latin America too, and I wanted to learn the language. And I was like, okay, I'm taking a sabbatical. But then as soon as I arrived, my former employer, like consulting company, kind of contacted me and said, like, Valentina, you always worked on this digital technology stuff, and now we won these tenders and we don't really know what to do with it. And then they were like, could you maybe do something as a freelancer? And I was like, I don't know. So I went on Google, like, how do you write an invoice? And that's where I started. And obviously from there, like I grew a lot and decided I really like it and took on more work. And, but I had the big advantage at the time that I was in Colombia learning Spanish. I had kind of budgeted myself to be okay for 6 months, living cheaply. Didn't have to pay a huge health insurance, didn't have to pay a huge amount of rent. And so my risk also was much lower. And I think especially if you want to get started in this field, then applying kind of this kind of innovation approach of like giving yourself a safe space to experiment and potentially fail and be completely fine with that. Like I could have gone like back after 6 months and be like, that was it. I just learned Spanish. No? I think that would be my key advice here.
It's like frugal innovation. And then last two questions. Can you talk about, if people listen to this today or in the future on the audio podcast, what kind of services you offer? How do people find you? Like, is LinkedIn your best channel, your website, or just, and kind of what are you most excited about helping with?
Yes. So yeah, contact me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on via my website as well. There's a contact form. I am quite excited about any type of program and project design and advisory, kind of like on a strategic level of how to build better projects, multi-stakeholder projects for innovation promotion. And those are often kind of projects that work around digital technologies, maybe things around ethical AI, use of digital technologies by certain groups. As well as kind of how to bring together big alliances and different partnerships. I love to be in this kind of like mediator role in a way and bringing people together, especially when it's international alliances. I work also increasingly on climate positive impact, and that's something I'm super interested in, that I'm actively growing my projects in. And then on the other hand, I can completely kind of like take off the hat of like, I have my own opinion and expertise on this and put on my process facilitator hat. And that is a role I really enjoy, where I work as a facilitator with international teams. I work as a trainer. I work on how can teams work better together, how to collaborate better, learning about cross-cultural communication, how to set up your own practices there, innovative practices, design sprints, these type of works. So if you ever need support in that, please do reach out.
Then the last question, like, what is something that's occupying your mind in a good way? It could be nothing to do with work. It could be a book, a movie, a show, a podcast, like just something that is kind of recently occupying your mind in a positive way.
There's a writer I really like, a Nigerian writer, Chimamanda Adichie, probably maybe a lot of you know her. And I think I love her books because she's also able to catch me a lot of times in my role as like, you know, a European working in these different intercultural settings, probably with like, you know, my own values, sometimes biases. And I love how, you know, reading her stories often challenges me to go back and be like, okay, you really need to understand the reality better, and can't just assume that whatever you came in here with is the wisdom and truth.
Okay.
Also, her books are highly entertaining, very well written, and I would definitely recommend her.
Okay. So thank you so much for sharing your energy, questions, wisdom, and resources. And as we started, and for people for watching from around the world, we have a lot of people from Africa today, but also other places. So as we started, please follow Valentina on LinkedIn and check out her website and be in touch about her services. Please follow PCDN and all of our stuff. And then whether it's this podcast or any other podcast, please 20 seconds, rate it and share it. And this will be live on Friday as an audio episode. Again, 200 plus episodes. Next week, we have an amazing, we're not on an innovation theme this month, but that seems to be where we're going. So again, someone who works on innovation in Comfama, but and futures, you know, force, which is a hot topic. And thank you so much, Valentina. We went a few minutes over, but super appreciate your time. And do you want to, as we finish, you just want to say where you're going next? Because we can do a little Colombian tourism promotion. So what town are you going to and why?
Yeah, maybe before I do that, also I really want to thank you. It's been quite a pleasure to be on this podcast, and thank you everyone for calling in today. I also feel there's such a wisdom in this room that I haven't tapped into. So if you ever want to reach out and just have a virtual coffee and chat about innovation practices, please do. Just message me on LinkedIn. And last bit of tourism advice. I'm going to Barichara, actually, to Santander department, visiting some huge canyons, impressive Andean landscapes, and hopefully cute towns. So will be an adventure.
Yes, Colombia is the second most biodiverse country in the world. So we're not sponsored by Colombia.
I think the first when you buy a square meter, because Brazil is also much larger.